Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Inclusive Voice podcast. My name is Pam McElvain. I'm the CEO and author of Diversity MBA Media, but also the host of the Inclusive Voice radio show, WCPT 2820 AM, Chicago Progressive Talk on Saturday morning. I'm so excited today to have with me Salvador Mendoza, lovely, affectionately known as Sal. He is the Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer of NBC Universal. So, good afternoon, Sal.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor.
So, where are you joining us from, Sal?
I'm joining us from the iconic 30 Rockefeller Plaza in New York City. Right, as you mentioned, this is one of those buildings, one of those companies that I've always been a fan on. And it is amazing to be able to walk into this building in New York City, 30 Rockefeller Plaza, for work every day. So I maybe, if I may say, live from New York.
Hey, there you go.
It is
Airing from
Thursday afternoon,
Chicago,
we'll say, but
your
yeah.
second home. Okay, there you go. And Sal, I also want to just congratulate you as being one of our inaugural 2023 top 25 leaders of impact and outstanding community service. So congratulations and thank you for allowing us to bestow this honor upon you.
Pam, thank you very much. I always say that it is an honor and a privilege, quite frankly, to be recognized in that manner, especially by you and what you represent. But equally important to me is to live up to those expectations, quite frankly, because I see that in these honors and recognitions that we receive, I always believe that there's a sense of responsibility, at least for me, to live up to those expectations and the responsibility and accountability so that I can honor in the spirit to you give these recognitions as well. So thank you. And I assure you that I am going to try my best to live up to it.
Oh, thank you so much. And I love the fact that you said responsibility and accountability. I'm like, oh my, now I'm going to have to live up to that when I receive awards. But I just want to say this so the audience know, we didn't just Sal wasn't just nominated and then he received the award. He had to actually accept this award. So the intention is really critical, and we're excited to have done that. So I do want to have you share some of your background, share your story, because I think it's important for folks to understand not just the career impact and journey you've had, but for our younger people to see that the different intersections that exist within today's world. And then we'll definitely go into talking about mentorship and sponsorship, and also the impact of DEI in today's current environment. So with that, kind of go back a little bit down memory lane, kind of where'd you grow up, and then also what inspired you, where you went to school and inspired you to do this work in DEI over the past few decades.
So thanks for asking that, because I love sharing my story for several reasons. Amongst them is that I know that my story will resonate with folks that are listening or that I encounter throughout, quite frankly, because like many people, I believe that my story is one of resilience, of challenges, of people helping me along the way, right? Creating coalitions along the way. So, going to that, I was born in Honduras, in Central America, and I migrated to Chicago when I was 14 years old to live with my grandmother, my mom's mom. And I love to share my story in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion because that for me created the foundation of what I do. And more importantly, it created the foundation that for my purpose. And I always say that I've been fortunate that I learned my purpose early on in college at the time. Early on, I learned that my purpose was advocacy. And I'll get that to how that has manifested throughout my professional career, throughout my personal career. But having moved from Honduras as a 14-year-old kid, right? To live with my grandmother, whom I had only seen maybe twice in my 14 years of existence. Mom and dad stayed back in Honduras, didn't speak the language, left all my friends, different culture for many senses, and it was February. So think about a kid who moved from Honduras. It's like 85 degrees weather-wise, and then I get to Chicago on the south side of Chicago, southeast side of Chicago, and there's snow on the ground, and it's about 30 degrees. Uh,
Wow.
Talk about a culture shock, right?
Yeah.
To that extent. But I always say that that experience shaped a lot of who I am now. I always say also that I've been privileged throughout my life that both of my grandmothers, fraternal grandmother, Nena, Doña Nena, she raised me along with my mom and my dad, living in Honduras for 14 years. And then when I came to live with my grandmother here in the United States, then she raised me the rest of the way. So I'm fortunate that I had both of these women in my life
Yeah.
shaping me throughout, which is the basis basically of what I mentioned about advocacy. And I say that because growing up in the southeast side of Chicago, I went to Bowen High School. There, I'm very proud of being a byproduct of English as a second language, as well as affirmative action or equal employment opportunity eventually, right? Because I went through Bowen High School, didn't speak English, so I joined ESL classes, and along the way, 3 years later, I found myself at Chicago State University attending college. So I went to Chicago State University, um, and again, advocacy as the foundation, as my purpose, because early on, I always say that, and I was fortunate to be able to say thanks to Curtis Bishop. It was the admissions counselors at Chicago State University. This guy who had this black guy who had absolutely nothing in common with a kid that with broken English, had a very low ACT score, but somehow he saw the potential in me and said, Sal, I'm going to accept you with conditions at Chicago State University, right? Even then to say, because again, I, for all intent and purposes, quite frankly, I shouldn't have been admitted. But Curtis Bishop, this guy saw something in me and said, I'm going to accept you. Yes, you're going to be a whole year of remedial courses, right? Your 101s,
Yeah.
but I know you're going to do well because I believe in you.
Yeah.
Eventually, years later, Chicago gave me the Latino Chicago Alumni Award, and I got a chance to thank Curtis publicly because I invited him as my special guest, and I got to thank him publicly for that years later. So
Yeah.
all of that storyline, when you're thinking about it, right, from migrating to the southeast of Chicago, what's at some point in time I was undocumented as well. So you have a kid at that time going to college. Uh, I I That's where I made my community, I will say. So let me pause there because I know we want to talk eventually, because from that to where I am now, right? I
Yeah.
always say that
But
it,
let me say this, Salvador. I know, we do have to this other stuff, but if you think about your story, right, and where we are today and what's going on, I mean, that's incredible because people, just the misnotions of, oh, immigrants coming here. I mean, my goodness, you're my generation, you're an immigrant. My goodness, ESL, English is the second language. Being able to first, are you first generation college as well, college graduate?
yeah, from my family, yeah.
Yeah, first generation college grad. I mean, close relationships with the Bulas, grandmothers, and the communities that, you know, that are real. And I just think that those are very important nuggets that you shared that can be connected to today that I think are getting lost in some of what we have to, you know, to be the celebrated executive. So I just want you to know that these are really, really important points that you're making. And so with that, you graduated, and when did you enter the workforce?
So, and believe it or not, I went at Chicago State. My degree was in computer science. Of course, at the time, I always joke
Okay.
that we
Okay.
were really doing programming with a real tablet and with a chisel, basically, because this back in the early 90s, right? That barely,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
the Apple Mac was still there, the PC was around, but it was the what is the 5 1/4 flip the disc
Oh, yeah. Oh
right.
my goodness.
So
Yes.
you're talking
Yes.
about
Okay. We can
back
reminisce.
in the day, right? So
That is back in the day.
but I realized early on, Pam, that sitting writing code in front of a computer was not going to be what I wanted to do. I actually wanted to teach. I wanted to be a teacher.
Okay.
And then once they said, oh, well, because if you want to be a teacher, you're going to have to take all these courses, you're going to do practice and so on and so forth. So I took the position that I'm going to finish that, my computer science degree. Then I'm going to get a master's degree in education and along the way get that teaching certificate. Um, so I went to work. My first job out of college was to work with the LULAC, which is the League of United Latin American Citizens. It was with their National Educational Service Center, and that was in 26th Street in a little village. And
Okay.
my job was basically to advocate, and you're gonna hear me say this a lot because again, I believe that that is what I do. And my job was to advocate for high school students in predominantly Black and Brown communities.
Mhm.
Advocate for those high school students to get into college. And basically, so I was helping students fill out financial aid forms, set up student college tours, waivers, college applications, talking to those high schools, do presentations, help them out with the application process to that extent, and even now and then to have conversations with parents, right, as to why it was good for those kids to end up at Eastern Illinois, at University of Illinois Champaign, at other universities along the way, that it was okay for them to move. So I did that for a few years. Then eventually, I went to work for the University of Illinois, again, doing recruiting, working
Okay.
on the multicultural programs, but still recruiting primarily from the Chicago schools. And then I ended up at Governor State University after, again, doing recruiting, working on retention programs, admissions, and so on and so forth as a counselor. And along the way there, I finished my master's degree in educational administration because
Okay.
I wanted to stay in administration. I wanted to do that. And it was at that point in time that basically, eventually I got my first job in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space.
Okay.
I went corporate basically at
Okay. Where did you get your master's from?
Governor State University
Governor State. Yeah, I
in,
didn't want to
in,
assume that. Okay.
in
And
educational
so
administration. Yeah.
you went into corporate into DEI. So you actually transitioned
Yeah.
from education to DEI. So
Yes,
that's
yeah,
always a
and
big question,
and
and you know how that happens.
it was interesting because now you're talking about the mid 90s, right? When I joined Hyatt Hotels in the mid 90s. And at the time, the diversity was not really a word that many people, the heads of diversity, was not really a role that many companies had. And I remember I had a friend of mine, actually a high school buddy of mine,
Mhm.
that worked at Hyatt Hotels in HR. And Gabriel Maldonado is his name. And Gabriel called me and said, "Hey, Sal, there's a brand new role that Hyatt is going to have, a director of diversity.
Okay.
And I said, I'm like, director of what? Because I had no idea what that was. I had no idea. He's like, yeah, it's a director of diversity role. And then he's like, it's precisely what you do, right? Is recruiting, working with the recruiters about recruiting stuff. It is about retention programs. It's about working with the community. It's about internally working with multicultural programs. He's like, it's essentially what you do right now, but this will be on a national level and it will be for Hyatt hotels.
Yes. Yes.
Uh, and I still wasn't interested because my goal, my goal was I still wanted to stay in education. My goal was to be a provost. That was my professional goal.
Okay. That makes sense.
I didn't
Okay.
want to be a provost of a university because or a system because I always thought that the provost was the COO of a company, right? This is the
Right.
person that
Right.
manages all of that. So, and so I told him no like a couple of times, and finally he said, "You know what? Send me your resume. Fax me your resume." This is at the time that everything was fax, right? We were not emailing documents at the time.
Oh my goodness.
I am, and I'm not that old, fam.
I know. I'm like, oh my goodness, I remember
So
that.
he's like, fax me your resume,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Update, fax me your resume because I had just finished my master's degree.
Mhm.
And I did, and then I forgot about it. And like a couple of months later, the head of HR for Hyatt called me and said, "Hey, Gabriel passed along. We're ready to start interviewing for these things." But at the same time, as I was interviewing with Wabansi Community College there in the Chicagoland area, and I was interviewing for an associate dean role,
Okay.
associate dean of student affairs, which is what I wanted to do, right? That was my path to get to being a provost. Um, and I said, you know what? I got nothing to lose. I'm gonna go talk to Hyatt to see what this diversity thing is about, right? And when I went and I met with them and they explained to me what they wanted to do with the role is a brand new role, having somebody come in. They love my experience, my professional experience. They love my life experience as well, right?
Yeah.
And they said, this is a blank canvas for you to come in, but it's all around recruiting, retention, development, and working externally with the community. And I just love everything that they said about it, right? In terms of the impact, and this was going to be national. Eventually, it became global, right? In terms because I spent 15 years at Hyatt building all of
Yes.
this.
Yes.
So, I love what they had to say. I fell in love. Eventually, Wabansi made an offer. Um, I had to call Hyatt, and this is a lesson for everybody. Don't be afraid, right, to reach out to these companies and say, now, don't bluff because if they call your bluff, then you're done.
That's
But
right.
eventually, I called Hyatt, the person that I had interviewed, that I had met with them twice, and I
Yes.
said, "Hey, I have an offer already, but I love everything that you have to say, and if I'm a serious candidate for this, then let me know because otherwise, right? If I'm not a serious candidate, then I'm gonna move on with this role." And immediately she says, "Have you accepted?" I said, "No, I have not." She says, "Hold on, let me call you back." Within an hour, she called Annie Shinarian, is her name. She called me up and she said, "Can you come tomorrow morning?" I'm
I
like,
love
"Of
it.
course I can come tomorrow morning."
Of course.
But I didn't realize then the next day it was basically to meet with the president of the company and the CEO, right? That they wanted. And then at some point in time with that discussion, it was not an interview anymore.
No, no.
They knew that I had an offer. And at some point in time, I realized in that conversation that they were basically selling me the role, that they were basically telling me as to why I needed to join Hyatt and as to why I shouldn't be considering. They didn't say it like that, but
Yes.
part of this conversation was that I realized, like a few minutes into it, that okay, this is not an interview. It's basically they are gonna make the offer and they want to convince me that this is the role that I want. Now, they made the offer that same day. In fact, I went to meet up with what eventually became my boss. I met up with her, and she made the offer right then and there, and I accepted right then and there because
So
like
I'm going to just interrupt for a second because there's a couple things that a lot that you said, but there's a couple connections, Sal, that before we move from this, I want folks to make because you talked about career transition from one industry to another. And then you talked about still working within your passion. I mean, even though you went from one industry into another, you still made sure that you were going to be able to stay within your passion and do the impact. And then the other thing you said that when you talk about the role of diversity and the chief diversity officer and directors and what they do, and I think, and the reason I'm stuck here just for a minute, particularly with folks not really understanding this work and how it manifests, but here you are and you talked about recruitment, retention, talent development, community impact. And this is still today, I mean, like, and the global impact at a broader level, but this is still the work. And so I was just amazed when you were saying that people aren't sure, well, what is the work and the impact? And 20 years ago or 25 years ago, that is, what you saw and what is. So with all of that, let me just, as you continue to move into, where you are now, I mean, this is a great career conversation. Um, how, not just how important, but how do you ensure in those conversations while you're looking to make the transition that it's the right, I don't want to use the word fit, but the right opportunity that's going to allow you to do what you aspire to do in another industry, if that makes sense.
so again, by then, right? I already knew um what my purpose. Again, I'll come back to advocacy. But this is where I said that I didn't find out. The funny thing about this is that I didn't find out how instinctively I
Mm.
was making these decisions in
Ooh.
the spirit of advocacy and in the spirit of solving problems. And let me explain that because to, that would answer your question. So when I joined NBC Universal, one of the first within a month or two, they have a they had at the time, this was over 12 years ago, they had a program that they will come and interview you, and they will basically ask several questions, like a hey, 5 questions for the new guy, right? Sort of deal. And I remember having the conversation, and this young man that was doing the interview um, asked me to give him chronologically, right, what I did. Uh, I went to I came in, when I was 14 years old. I went to high school right away. Within 3 years, I was in college without understanding much English, without speaking much English. But a community at Chicago State University basically sustained me. They helped me out, and then eventually I graduated. I went to work for a non-for-profit organization, helping community kids get into college and advocating for them. Then after that, I went to work for a couple of higher education institutions where I was able to navigate my way into the EOP program, into the multicultural programs, in working and advocating internally as well as externally for those kids that were put on the waiting list, right? Especially at the University of Illinois at Urbana, highly selected school. And then eventually I went to work for corporate at Hyatt hotels, and then I ended up in media and entertainment. And what I realized right then and there, Pam, was that holy cow, at every instance where I instinctively have made this move, right, has been because while I had advocated in that instance for that community, I realized um, instinctively that there was a challenge at the next step that I needed to get into and work from within, right?
Okay.
And let me explain that. So when I was in college, I mentioned Curtis Bishop, a guy who saw the potential in me and gave me a chance, right? As this Latino kid from the southeast side of Chicago with broken English gave me a chance and said, I see something in you. So, what is my first job after that? Work for LULAC, a community organization that worked directly with high school kids in helping them out, in removing obstacles, right? And
Yes.
and and encourage them and advocating for them and building a community so that they will understand the value of a higher education.
Mhm.
Well, when that happened, then I went to work for a couple of universities because I saw the need in some of those kids that I was advocating for that were not accepted into these colleges and universities that I knew I saw myself in them at that
Yes.
time, right? To
Yeah.
say, man, and you're not giving them an opportunity to get into your university, to get into your program, either U of I, University of Chicago, UIC, Northwestern, right? So I'm like, I gotta go work for one of those colleges. So I ended up at University of Illinois Champaign, right, in admissions and recruiting because so but what happened then, right, along the way, other than my friend Gabriel Maldonado insisting that I do this, is that once I saw what the company wanted to do with it is, man, as these kids go through the cycle and they graduate from colleges and universities and working with our career centers in these colleges and universities, some of them had a hard time getting into corporate America, right?
Okay.
So instinctively, now, now I can say I was wise back then, and that's why I did it. I didn't know.
Yeah, that's right. That's real. That's real. Yeah.
I didn't realize it until I was here. I'm like, holy crap! When I look back at my life, right? It is to that extent. And that's why I joined corporate America. That's why I joined Hyatt, because it's an opportunity to always work it from within. Now, media and entertainment, it was a whole different ball game because by then, having grown up, uh, being undocumented at some point in time, always an immigrant, media and entertainment, including NBC, have always uh, had the responsibility and accountability of how media and entertainment covers our community, right? How they portrayed our community.
Yes.
What are the news about our community? What are the programs about our community? Because, I would always see that. I'm always been a fan of NBC. So it's wild to me when I walk into the NBC towers there on Michigan Avenue, Columbus Avenue. It's wild to me that now I get to walk into that building because I've been a fan. But I always knew that media and entertainment, I needed to be part of it along the way because of
Yeah.
the responsibility that we have as a company, as an industry, to do better in our communities. So yes, regressively,
Yeah.
I have made these moves. I can say is because I'm wise and I knew, but I didn't know, to be honest with
This is incredible. And hence why, we honor you as one of the top 25 impact leaders. But we talk about and I just want to spend a couple minutes, when you talk about sponsorship, and even though we're talking about in your story where people were watching you and seeing that here before you even realized it, later instinctively you felt the connection, but they saw where you would bring value and drive change. And so really, that was, when I'm listening to you, Sal, that was like, you were sponsored, by that. And then of course you also had mentors helping you along the way. And so whether you were, you know driving those relationships, curating those relationships, they actually, were happening um, within your space, both at the same time. And so just briefly, I would like, for you to talk a little bit about how particularly young talent, developing talent, can navigate really strong mentors to be in a position where others would want to sponsor.
So, and you're right. Let me start by saying I have and I still have and I will continue to have many mentors, many folks that some of them don't even know, right, that they're my mentors,
Right, right.
and at different levels, right? It is there's some folks that I call to bounce off ideas. There's some folks that I call to really get their insight in terms of how they navigated certain situations. There's some folks that I call just to complain, quite frankly, and they understand that. But there are also some folks, right, that keep it real with me.
Right.
That even though I have several, and I have several throughout the spectrum, right? And
Yes.
title has nothing to do with it. Um, age has nothing to do with it, but life experience to some extent does, right? In terms of people that I reach out and I connect with. And I have some folks that I will have a conversation with them and I will be complaining and they know and they appreciate and I appreciate that whatever I'm sharing with them that I am right about about sharing and complaining, but I
Mhm.
know those folks at the end of the day, after I'm done, they will be basically say, okay, Sal, I get it and you're right, but now it's time to move on, right? Because you need these individuals to tell you exactly um, how it is and tell you not what you want to hear, but what you should be hearing from a perspective of advice. So I have a spectrum of folks to that extent as I look at individuals, right, to connect to, there are a couple of things that I live by as I am working to network, as I am working to build a mentor for me. Uh, and also I look as to reaching out and how I look about mentoring folks along the way and offering my advice and my life experience, right?
Mhm.
If they don't want to hear it, then I'm okay with it. That's fine.
Mhm.
But I extend myself in working with folks. For me, it is essential for me um, to when I'm approaching somebody in relations to asking for advice is that I don't come with a personal agenda. That I have something else. That I also have something to offer of value to this person, right? If I am asking for advice, is I want to make sure that they understand that I appreciate that and that they can count on me for also offering that value to them when it comes to the mentoring element to it. But I
Right.
also understand that as a mentor, right?
Mhm.
If somebody coming to me is I don't expect anything in return. The only thing that I demand is that if I am gonna mentor you or if I am gonna sponsor you, and we know the difference between those two, right?
Yes.
Is that you live up to those expectations from me in terms of like um how do you work in with authenticity, uh,
Yes.
how are you going to exercise how professional you are in the way, and also if you're coming to me for advice is and and if I'm providing you real advice is that you don't necessarily have to do it all, but at least attempt to do something, right? Because what you're doing obviously is not working. And if you're coming to me for guidance and advice, I'm going to provide it. I don't
Yeah.
expect you 100% to get it, but at least attempt to change the ways to do
Yeah.
that. So when you're approaching somebody to work with you, either on a mentorship perspective,
Mhm.
is understand that you have to be authentic, you have to be transparent, and you have to honor more than anything, you have to honor that relationship.
Yeah. You know, and I love that too. You have to be responsible. You have to be responsible. And I think you have to be open to feedback, because if you're providing that advice as a mentor, you can guarantee that that sponsor is pausing, am I seeing this right? So I really appreciate that. And I know we're here at time, but you have an incredible story in your journey when you talk. In this month, we're celebrating Hispanic heritage. And one of the things, the work that Diversity MBA Media has done throughout the year is try to educate audiences on the many dimensions, the Latino culture, just even here in America, the difference between May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, Mexican independence, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Dominican, and so many, and knowing that it's important to respect the cultures. So when you think about the meaning and how even NBC Universal represents the celebration of this month, what are some of the key messages and key themes that come to mind, Sal?
So look, exactly. We're probably, what is the 16th today, 17th, 2 days
17th.
past the allowable 30 days, right? We get September 15th through October 15th. But let me tell you what we have done at NBC Universal in honoring of those Heritage Month elements, right? Because I think there's a reason why these Heritage Month and proclamations have been done from a federal government perspective in honoring the different cultures. And you see it more and more now, right? November is going to be both Native American Heritage Month as well as military appreciation and military and family appreciation month. There's a reason element to that, but the position that we have taken at NBC Universal is that it goes in line that being Hispanic is 365 days a year, and every 4 years is 366, right? We have taken that position. Being Black, that's what it means as well, and so on and so forth. So when we a few years ago, this is about 4 years ago, like around when the pandemic started, as we celebrate all of this heritage, from a company perspective, we took the position that everything that we do, while we are going to heighten it and spotlight it that month, right? In this case, Hispanic heritage. Right now, we're in the middle of Disability Awareness Month as
Yep.
well. Is that we are going to take the month out of it on every collateral piece, on every and everything that we do, and all of the assets that we provide our employee resource groups to celebrate it, or our business units to celebrate it. Every collateral piece that we have, we took away the month element to it, because
I
while
love
we
that.
are going to encourage you that during that particular month, right, we put the spotlight on it. We do a lot of stuff. That's why on any of our platforms at NBC Universal, from Bravo, Telemundo, Sports, MSNBC, CNBC, every platform that we have, you are going to see during that month a little reel, about a little video about us celebrating that. But what you're not going to see is the word month in it, because while we encourage, what will participate during that particular month, heighten awareness. What we encourage everybody is that continue using those assets, continue using that collateral material throughout the year, right? So even now, our
Yeah.
Black Employee Network group does events in using the tagline that we use. Hispanic Heritage, I mean, our Unidos employee resource groups will continue to use the collateral and the assets in events throughout next year, using the line, using the tagline, I'm sorry, that we have about all that we are, right? So
Yeah.
that is part of what we have taken this issue to say, let's celebrate during that proclamated month, but let's don't stop there, right? Just because it is the 17th of October, we're going to continue celebrating Hispanic heritage along the way in everything that we do. And I think that the more that we do that, the more that we create awareness, the
Yes.
more that we celebrate all that we are, and I'm using the tagline from our Hispanic heritage, the word that I celebrate, all that I am, immigrant, once undocumented, Latino from the southeast side of Chicago, right?
Yes.
At NBC Universal, a father, a husband, right? A son. I'm
Yes.
celebrating all that I am as a Hispanic. We need to celebrate the whole community year round.
I love that. All of the intersections are what make us who we are. And those intersections allow for the multidimensional connections that we make. And I love that because when people used to say, "Oh yeah, well we're celebrating this month, but I'm a male, I'm a Latino, I'm a father all year round." So so
And
being able to do
listen,
that, so we'll take
absolutely,
that from you guys. We'll take the
absolutely.
month. I'm not sure if our teams put the month on there, but we're going to take it out, and I love the continued connections that should be made, and because it's so much too. But with that, what an incredible conversation, and we are going to push you out there and say, here's this leader, and here we're going to show those of you that can you too can be someone, and let's help the next generation in a path forward. So with that, Sal, thank you so much for this conversation. I'm so excited to share this, with our audience and the many, many people that'll be able to touch you. Now, if folks wanted to reach out and connect with you on LinkedIn, is it Salvador Mendoza
Yeah,
LinkedIn?
you can find me under Salvador Mendoza. Also, I believe that you have my email address. Please feel free to share it along the
Oh,
way.
okay.
I no do that. I'm serious. I'm serious. I always say that I am available, and that's the other challenge that I will say to people is if somebody says reach out to me, right? Tell me in my cases, I always say is tell me how I can be of service. You know
Yes.
what? Take that opportunity and take that person to heart in doing that. Follow up with that person, ask them to meet up with you. Guess what? If that person doesn't respond to you, then that's on them, right? It's not on you.
Yes.
But you hold me accountable to that. Pam, share my email address, reach out to me, tell me how I can be of service, and hold me accountable.
We will. And we are here at Diversity and Being Media want to thank you and NBC Universal for partnering with us. So with that, we're going to sign off, and everyone, you'll be able to tap into this podcast on the Diversity MBA YouTube series as well. You'll see this in our next DEI Insight. So also go to NBC Universal and see all of the great
Yes.
diversity they have on not just news, but in the TV programming as well as the music. So with that, we'll say have a great day.
Thank you, Pam. Gracias. Buenas tardes.
Awesome.